very nice to be here, and I'd like to share with you some thoughts of mine on CBDCs. This book coming out was originally going to be with Nick Anthony at the Cato Institute, and we think in very similar terms. We discovered about 6 weeks ago that we had two drafts of our book which were so totally different that we then decided we'd publish them separately. So the IIA, bless them, thanks to James Forder, have agreed to publish my version of it. If you want to see Nick's version, Cato will publish it, probably around Christmas. So just to define, a CBDC is a retail digital currency issued by the central bank. Strictly speaking, you could have wholesale CBDCs, but they're not very interesting. We've had them for many decades. Essentially, the banks have accounts at the central bank or with other central banks and so forth. There's no real action in that except the process of ongoing development. The action is with retail. So retail meaning that, you, me, firms and so forth can get our accounts, CBDC accounts at the central bank. My basic bottom line is that these things are unnecessary, they're undesirable, or they don't work. I can't find a single good reason why you would want to support one of these things. In my talk, I want to make a few general points about CBDCs, and then I want to talk about lessons from recent experience with CBDCs, because there's been a fair bit going on, which has not got the publicity, perhaps, that it might. So basically, the bottom line is CBDCs have no obvious benefits to society. So the technical benefits essentially are zero. At first sight, you might say that they're a perplexing addition to the digital ecosystem. However, even central bankers struggle greatly to articulate their usefulness. Just look at some of the debates going on in the Fed, for instance, but we're having similar debates here and also in Europe. So at first sight, they seem harmless enough. But then the question that you should ask is the following. Suppose a central bank issues a CBDC and then step by step compels everybody to use it, prohibits the use of alternatives, such as cash, and imposes very serious restrictions on any alternatives that are still left. At that point, then we all have to use the central bank currency, and then the problem is that the central bank currency is weaponizable money. And this is the key problem. It's the only problem that matters. So basically what you have is CBDC becomes a tool for almost unlimited powers of control. Augustine Carstens, the head of the BIS, he recently said, and this is really quite a quote, he says, the key difference with the CBDC is that the central bank will have absolute control under the rules and regulations that will determine the use of the CBDC. The key words here are absolute control. So these can be used to implement a future lockdown. I imagine how Justin Trudeau might have used one of these things. They can be used to implement pseudo-economic policies, policies designed to punish disfavored groups. They can be used to implement or to support a Chinese-style social credit system. It can be used to destroy what's left of financial privacy, not that there's a great deal of it left, as it is. As a lockdown tool, we could use a CBDC because they're weaponizable, they're programmable, so that they can be programmed so that you can't spend it more than three miles outside your home. It can limit how many times you can spend it in a week. You're only allowed out once a day or once a week or something like that. You can't spend it on unapproved items. You can force people to get a jab. If you don't get the jab, you can't spend your money, etc., etc. And if this sounds far-fetched, I can assure you it is not. You think of the Canadian truckers 20 months ago. It's fairly obvious what Justin Trudeau would have done had he had these things But we see it in other countries too, in Pakistan, for instance, where this was pushed very aggressively by various state governments and so forth. So this is not a joke, it's not a sort of hypothetical, it's a very real danger. So if we just go back to my friend Martin Hutchinson, defines pseudo-economics as the use of economic policy to punish people we don't like. The government then has absolute control. It can block payments to people it doesn't like. It can go after its enemies. They can be real or imaginary. It doesn't matter. You can banish people. You can throw people out of the monetary economy and they can just starve. You get on the wrong side of the authorities. Anybody, whistleblowers, for instance, you have a government dominated by health fanatics. We can control your diet. Environmental fanatics, we can, etc., etc. Religious fanatics, we can save your souls, and so forth. It's horrifying. The Chinese system, the social credit system, is the model here. The Chinese CBDC was agreed in 2014 that they would introduce it. Years later, they've got a pilot system up and running, and this is the way it kind of works. Good behaviour is rewarded, bad behaviour is punished, so everybody has a social credit score. So bad behaviour might be bad driving, loitering, smoking in non-smoking zones, making frivolous purchases. Booing the national anthem was a recent case where a poor guy booed the national anthem and they chased him down and arrested him. So punishments can be many and varied. A slow internet connection, or you can't buy a flight, or you can have your dog taken away, or something like that. It's all really gruesome stuff. Now, the big problems with the disintermediation of the financial system, because essentially the CBDC would be issued as a wallet. It can't be loaned on, so therefore, to the extent that people swap from deposits to CBDCs, you've disintermediated the banking system there. You get a fall in deposits, etc., etc. There's a nice analogy here with the US Postal Service, which in the 1930s was offering returns that were so high that it was disintermediating much of the banking system. But there's an odd thing about this. All the people who support CBDCs say that it's a great idea, but we don't want too much of it. You see, so we'll have restrictions on the amount issued. So that sounds a little bit odd to me. If it's a good thing, why would you limit it? We have monetary policy uses. You could use it for helicopter drops. So what? So what? I mean, you can make helicopter drops. You can have expiry dates, so your money will die if you don't spend it within 30 days or something. You can control inflation, a new means of controlling inflation. That is, you get people to hold CBDCs and then you just cancel them. The money supply drops, great stuff. A new angle, that one. There's financial inclusion. Now this is a big one. This is probably the number one argument that the central bank propagandists use to support CBDCs. It's almost always used, and it's completely wrong. So if we look at this, let's just look at the Western developed countries. All except the United States have very high levels of financial inclusion. 99.5% or something of the population have a banking account. That's the definition of financial inclusion. If we look at the United States, that proportion is rising quite rapidly, and it's being solved by measures to encourage people to get a bank account. And that's ongoing, and that's solving the problem with before CBDCs even come along. Financial inclusion is a problem in the developing world, but even there, it's being solved by ongoing processes of digital cash and so forth. So this is a non-solution to a non-problem, and yet they still seem to take this argument and twist it and say this is why we want CBDCs. It just does not make any sense. There are other problems. There's the danger of mission creep. So I would say to you, even if the central bank guaranteed that they would never weaponize these things, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, because you don't know. Down the road, they will weaponize it at their earliest convenience, and forget any guarantees. We have the dangers of cyber vulnerabilities. With a centralized system, it's extremely dangerous. It's a single point of failure. And then here's an example of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Well, when that hit the system, the whole system crashed. Everybody wanted cash. The Fed had to fly a plane load of cash in to rescue the situation. Ryan McMakin has a nice quote. He says, "In a cashless world, you'd better pray the power never goes out." You see, so I think that's a great quote. So anyway, let me focus now on the experiences. So the world's first CBDC was the Avanti card, introduced in Finland in 1993. It was not called a CBDC, the term didn't exist at the time, but it was effectively a CBDC. It was designed to replace cash and small notes, big fanfare. It was spun off after 3 years to become a private thing, and then it became obsolete and they abandoned it. Anyway, so that's the first one. The next one is Ecuador in 2015. Now this was rolled out to really big fanfare among the CBDC crowd. This was going to work wonders, etc., etc. So the circulation of the dinero electronico peaked at, I checked the numbers on this, at less than 0.05% of M1. It peaked at that before it was abandoned as a total flop. And it failed because people didn't trust the central bank. Of course they didn't trust the central bank. I mean, so David Gerard, the guy who wrote the Revenge of the 50-Foot Blockchain, he has a great quote where he says, one lesson in this case is that that we have to work hard on retail acceptance of your exciting new payment system. It's much harder than it looks. I keep finding all these whiz-bang payment system plans, and they all died of minor inconvenience. It's interesting. He says, serving customers at scale turns out to be quite difficult in practice. He says, and don't try and back your system with the central bank that your customers don't trust. It's fairly obvious, but that's what happened. Then there were others, Denmark, for instance, looked into this. Kenya, Philippines, Senegal, all abandoned their plans for CBDCs. The Danish one was particularly sensible, I thought. It said, it sensibly concluded that an advanced economy had no need of a CBDC. That's it. That seems right to me. There were 3 in the Caribbean. So the one that gets a lot of attention is the Sand Dollar, the Bahamian CBDC. It was rolled out to huge fanfare in October 2020, but the per capita circulation of Sand Dollars is about 86 cents, or 0.003% of GDP. That's some success, isn't it, right? So the Sand Dollar barely registers as a form of currency, as somebody put it. Even the value of coins in circulation increased faster than the CBD circulation. So the Sand Dollar, to me, is just a sand castle that its inventors mistook for a groundbreaking fintech innovation. Okay, then we had the East Caribbean Central Bank, which launched its Dcash in October 21. This has similar low rates of adoption, and then it went offline for a couple of months, reminding us that a CBDC is just another public sector infrastructure problem, and we all know what they're like. So then the Bank of Jamaica launched its Jamdex in April 2021, and by February 22, the amount of CBDCs in circulation was less than 0.01% of total electronic retail transactions. So not a great success, but the big ones to come. Nigeria. So Nigeria launched its CBDC, the IIMR, in October 21. Some illustrative reactions, which I'm going to spend a bit of time on here, because I trolled through the media the media citations on it because there was a lot of discussion in Nigeria about this. So one guy said, the issue is that all of this can be readily, adequately addressed using existing financial payments methods. Right. He says, Nigeria is the fintech capital of Africa. And there are so many options, so many ways to pay somebody fast already. So what's the point? And somebody else says, I'm still at a loss on what the IIMR is meant to solve other than helping the government print money. Yeah, that's a nice one. How is it superior to existing payment systems? Well, the answer is it isn't. So by August 22, the ratio of CBDC transactions volume to total e-transactions volume was 0.013%. 0.013, so it's negligible. Then the governor of the central bank decided to up the stakes. Now bear in mind that Nigeria is an interesting economy because it has a very high-tech sector, but it also has a very low-tech cash sector, which is big. He decided they'd get rid of cash entirely. And so they embarked on what can only be described as a crazed war on cash, a bit like India, and maybe it was worse. People were given, let's say, 2 months to cash in. It was called the currency redesign. You had to take all your cash, take it to the central bank. You get smaller denominations, so we're not having large amounts, but they weren't printed. And people were queuing for days outside. There were riots, there was violence, there was absolute chaos. And of course, in amongst all this, there was a big switch towards crypto and other forms of digital currency. So here was a report written by a free market institute in Nigeria, and he says, millions of citizens have slipped into penury and destitution as a result of the disruptions and tribulations perpetrated by the currency redesign policy, the war on cash, especially the mopping up of over 70% of the cash in the economy. I mean, this is breathtaking. Nigerians have not been traumatized in recent history. The economy is gradually grinding to a halt because of the collapse of payment systems across the economy. And here's what the finance minister said. The only sore point among all of this is the pain it's caused to citizens. Apart from that, it's fine. So now, on March the 3rd, 2023, the Supreme Court ruled that the demonetization policy was illegal and unconstitutional. The old notes were still legal tender. On June the 9th, the new president, Bola Tinubu, suspended the CBN governor with immediate effect. He was arrested by the secret police. He was accused of a string of offences relating to abuse of office, stealing public funds, sabotage, and so forth. He really got it heavy duty. And then, he's now in the hands of the police, and a trial is coming up. So that the war on cash side of it has been a catastrophic failure. I'm not quite sure where we stand on the CBDC side of it, but basically it wasn't working. Then we have China. So we have the Chinese system is essentially designed to support the social credit system. By October 2000, last year, a year ago, the E1 uptake was just 0.5% of GDP, which is higher than any of the others. A former PBOC official described this uptake as disappointing and attributed that to the fact that cash needs were already met in other ways, even in China. So it's not going very well. The common themes with CBDC experiences are very, very, very low uptake and a widespread view that CBDCs had no meaningful role to fulfill. So should we trust these people to use their power wisely? Well, I would simply say to ask the question is to answer it. I'm reminded of Milton Friedman. If you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years' time there'll be a shortage of sand. So the most basic question is not what is best, but who shall decide what is best. That's Thomas Sewell, of course. Now, the whole point of a decentralized society is that we trust people to make their own choices. Why am I telling you guys this? But even the most hypothetically benign dictatorship should never be trusted, period. And if you don't believe that, well then, I'm sorry, we've got another discussion to have. Conclusions: the benefits are zero. The dangers are enormous and incalculable. The techno issues of CBDCs are of no import, except to distract from the real issues at stake, which is who should control. Okay. The only issue that matters is the potential of CBDCs to facilitate a reach for total power by our betters, the best in Plato's terms, whose self-assumed superiority entitles them to rule in their own minds. So even if we granted the assumption that the best know the best, what guarantees that we have that this would not be abused? None at all. So I would say the need to depoliticize money and banking has never been more pressing than now. So thank you very much.